Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank you for joining us today for our webinar, How to Create a School Makerspace. I'm Jen Bradley, Director of Makerspace Marketing at Demco, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we get started, I'll go through some housekeeping details, and then I'll introduce our speaker, and he can start today's presentation. On your screens, you should see a question box on the right-hand side. If you have a question or need technical help, please use that box to communicate with us. If we don't get to your question during the session, we will be posting questions and answers along with the recorded webcast, presentation slides, and resources after the event. You will receive an email in about a week letting you know when everything is available. You'll also notice our presenters' contact information as well as mine. Please feel free to contact us directly with any questions that haven't been answered in the follow-up resources. We're also using Twitter today with the hashtag DemcoIdeas. You should be able to see this hashtag on the side of your screen in the chat box, and we are monitoring that feed as well for questions and comments. Well, I believe that's all of the housekeeping, so let's get started with the program. As I mentioned, I'm Jen Bradley, and I'm moderating today's session. And I'm really excited to introduce you to our speaker today, Nicholas Provenzano. Known as the Nerdy Teacher, Nicholas is the Technology Coordinator and Makerspace Director at University Liggett School in Michigan, and is also a prolific author, speaker, and consultant. He writes on his website, thenerdyteacher.com, edupedia.org, and many other prominent educational websites. Nicholas has been featured on CNN.com, Education Week, the New York Times, and other media outlets. And he is the author of 2 best-selling books, Your Starter Guide to Makerspaces and The Maker Mentality. In 2013, Nicholas was awarded the Technology Teacher of the Year by McCall and ISTE. And he shares his Makerspace expertise on the Demco Ideas and Inspiration site, and you can also follow him on Twitter and Instagram at The Nerdy Teacher. We're so excited to have Nicholas with us today to provide tips on how to create a makerspace in your school or library setting. So it looks like we're ready to get started with the program. Nicholas, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. It's always super awkward to hear your bio read back to you. But I'm really proud of the great things I've been able to do with teachers. And I've just been very lucky because I have a great staff that's willing to try new things and engage. And with the building of makerspaces, it's sort of the same thing. So I'm excited to share with all of you guys some of the tips and tricks and tools to build the makerspace. And of course, if anyone has any questions, please, you can put them in the box, you can tweet them out. I'm happy to engage in any of you to build a makerspace. So here we are, your starter guide to makerspaces. And one of the things we're going to look at right away is about getting ready. So I have this idea of, ready, set, make. So we're going to start off by getting ready. We need to prepare ourselves. And one of the ways to do that is to really define making. And for me, I prefer very broad definitions of making. And the reason for that is that the minute you start to exclude things, I feel like you move away from the maker mentality. This idea that making needs to be all inclusive is very important to me. So making is the creation of something new that was not there before. It's really broad, and I really like it because it could be anything. It could be code, it could be a sweater you're knitting, it could be writing slam poetry, it could be drawing a comic, it could be taking pictures. What's really important to understand is that when we talk makerspaces, we're not talking about technology-only spaces. We're talking about spaces that support student creativity, student expression, and teacher creativity and teacher expression. So for me, a broad definition of making is important because the minute we start excluding types of making is the minute we start excluding students, and that is not what we are all about. As part of that, I want to make room for the A in STEM or STEAM, the arts. My background is 15 years as an ELA teacher, and that really surprises people because they have this view that maker spaces are for these science classes, physics, geometry, and things like that. What would an art teacher have to do with a makerspace? And I always say everything. STEM will make something work, but STEAM will make it work and look good or sell it to you. So the A is important. So when you keep that in mind, you're accessing an entire part of your school that can utilize and get a wonderful benefit out of a makerspace. So as you start to plan your space, think of a whole school approach, not just a science or technology approach. So what is making all about? And for me, it's about having fun and learning. And it's something that has slowly disappeared in our educational system as students get older. K through 4 seems to have it nailed. Creating, making, sort of that fun engagement. And then I always pick on 5th grade. It's like right around 5th grade. It's this view of, okay, we have to do real school now. Everybody sit in their rows, everybody take out your notebook, and you're gonna start copying everything down. And there's a change. And it's interesting that it happens around that time. So if you're ever curious about seeing making in action, head down to kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th grade, and you can really see examples of teachers fully engaged in this making process because their rooms are almost gigantic maker spaces if you actually take a look at them. And so using those as inspiration, you can create an even larger space in your library or another designated area of your school, and even a small corner of your classroom to really support and engage in the making process. So we have to get set, right? The big part, of course, is getting set. What do we do? How do we engage? And, sometimes it's about starting with basics. It is the idea that Lego, one of the most basic building blocks of our childhood, is a wonderful place to get started. And it's where I started it with even my own home, is that my son loves to build with Lego. And so this is a couple of years ago with his Duplo, he decided to build his own Ninja Warrior course that all of his characters would have to race through, and we would time it, and we have to climb up the warped wall there. And it was a blast. And, he was in, 1st grade when he built this, or kindergarten. And for him, it was this exciting opportunity to build. And our students have that innately in them, the building, the making, the creation. And it's about taking that natural feeling to build and integrating it into our classroom more thoroughly, and looking at tools that take it to the next step. And Little Bits is just one of those examples of a tool that's like Lego conceptually, but really goes in another direction. What I like about Little Bits is that they snap together like with magnets, and they help complete circuits. They're great for teaching circuitry, and kids can create so many different projects with them, and they're color coded, so you know what each ones are: inputs, outputs, batteries. And what's great is that you can just sort of have fun with them. My son absolutely loves to just play with them. In this project he built for fun on his own, I gave him all the bits. He attached a temperature sensor, a readout, and a fan, so that when it got to a certain temperature, the fan would kick on. And he put this all together himself without any practice from me or guidance from me. And he goes, "Look, Dad, when the temperature gets to here, the fan kicks on." And I'm like, "That's pretty awesome. Like, good job." He goes, "I want to take it to bed with me." And I said, "Well, why? That seems kind of crazy." He goes, "So when it gets too hot, I can just hold it over my head and let the fan blow on my face while I sleep." So probably wouldn't work out too well for him as he tried to hold that above his face while he slept. But when I told him that he basically created an air conditioning system, he was like blown away. But truthfully, what is an air conditioning system, right? We have our temperature gauge, and it tells us at a certain temperature kick on the air conditioning, and he built a very rudimentary version of that. And so when I explained to him that's what he had done, he's like, "Whoa, that's like really, really cool." And that's just sort of that power of letting kids just sort of freely make and create, and giving them the space and the tools to do that. He also built his own flashlight. He said, "Look, Dad, if I push the button with the light and the battery, I could look for things that have fallen underneath the couch." Now, my son didn't invent the flashlight, but to him, he basically did. He looked at battery, button, light, and was like, "Oh, when I push the button, the light turns on. And what's awesome about that, he goes, it's weird. It's like something's blocking the battery from turning the light on, but when I push the button, it totally works. He's talking about open and closed circuits without knowing that terminology, about realizing that. And that's like a concept that's covered in 6th grade with students. So here he is in 1st, 2nd grade discovering circuits all on his own and having a basic understanding of how those work. So one of the things that I get probably more than anything else from students is this, from students and from teachers, is this: what goes in a makerspace? You know, I get emails that'll say, I have X amount of dollars from my principal and I need to spend it. What should I buy? And it's always a tough question for me to answer, because every single makerspace and every single school, whether they're in the same district or not, have different needs. And it's so critically important for anyone building a makerspace to have those discussions with teachers and students about what it is they're doing. You might not need 3D printers because all of your students aren't focused on 3D printing. You may need a CNC machine because your kids are really into woodworking. You don't know what you don't know until you don't know it, right? I mean, that's sort of like the crazy thing of all of this, is that, you know, you want to spend money to prepare kids and utilize tools. But having said that, there are some things I've seen that are fairly standard in a lot of makerspaces because they're a great entry tool. So I'm going to show you a lot of basic makerspace tools. I'll show you some advanced tools and how they're used. I'll provide some examples. So kind of keep up with where I'm going. And if you have questions on any of these tools, don't hesitate to put them in to the webinar or reach out to me through social, and I'm happy to answer those. So one of the things that stands out for me is cardboard and duct tape, the basic ingredient to any makerspace. Here's a picture of some students working on the cardboard fort that they decided to build. I thought for sure by middle school, students were totally not into building forts or designing cardboard houses, but I was very much wrong. These students built a multi-level, multi-room fort with 5 or 6 other students, and they took apart a broken laptop and put the screen up to act like a TV monitor, and they carved holes into the boxes so that they could be doorways to attach other cardboard boxes. It was an undertaking that lasted for about 3/4 of the year. And it got to the point where we had to move it to a commons area because it was taking up the vast majority of the space in the makerspace, which was 1 room at the time. I ran out of duct tape and had to order a whole bunch more. So it was a really, really important sort of tool in our makerspace to have access to cardboard and duct tape. So I'm really, really, really advocating for these type of basic tools in spaces, primarily because they're accessible. Cardboard is aplenty in our school and a lot of schools. So definitely reach out to your maintenance and custodian. Even local businesses have lots of cardboard boxes that you can use. To go along with that, Makedo. If you're looking to spare the environment all the duct tape that's going to be used, potentially thrown away, Makedo is an awesome tool. I found these a couple of years ago at a conference and didn't think twice about it until I had all of this cardboard in my makerspace and kids were building. And what Makedo is, they are cardboard screws. They are cardboard saw and a screwdriver, and they essentially allow you to connect cardboard safely and quite easily, to be honest, and then reuse them later when you're done with the cardboard that you've created. My students absolutely love the Makedo. I absolutely love it because, again, it's good to be able to reuse pieces over and over again, and it definitely saves me on a larger than normal duct tape budget, which I wasn't expecting my first year. Dash and Dot. Dash and Dot is a wonderful programmable robot from Wonder Workshop. And what's really nice about the Dash and Dot is that it's really great for K through 5 or 6, which is wonderfully helpful. But I have found that even students in the middle school can really appreciate it. And then the Q robot, which is another robot from Wonder Workshop, is really, really great too. CUE, Q robot, that my kids have loved to code and design with. So if you're looking for interactive ways to bring coding to sort of like the physical world, I highly recommend taking a look at the Dash and Dot robots. Glue guns. I never thought in a million years that I would need as much glue and glue guns and glue sticks as I've had to supply by Makerspace. But kids love to build with hot glue and the popsicle sticks and really any type of arts and crafts stuff. They prefer hot glue to stick it together. And it's great. And the kids love to use it and design and stick things together. So it's a quick assembly. So if you have shortened periods for kids to work, glue guns actually are really effective at getting things to stick together and hold, as opposed to other types of glue that sometimes take a while to set. So definitely keep an eye on glue guns. You know, it's definitely something that, depending on the age group, you want to be careful about, because it does get really, really hot. So for kids to potentially burn their fingers gluing things, you definitely want to make sure that these are age appropriate for the students that are using them. Strawbees, considering designing and building and creating. Strawbees are just sort of a fun, exciting way to allow kids to just keep their hands busy at times. I have found that kids love to just sit and build and talk with their friends about whatever's going on in the world for them. And they end up with a crazy design. They're like, oh, I built this. And it's just designed to really be a great building tool. And again, these are great K through 8 and really even high schoolers, again, to just sort of build even more complex designs with them, I think are really, really effective. Makey Makeys. Makey Makeys are phenomenal. Makey Makeys are a computer board that connects to your computer, and you can program using Scratch, and you can connect with alligator clips so you can make projects come to life. One of the more popular ones is the piano, the banana piano, where you connect the alligator clips to the board, and then the other end's the bananas, and you run the program, and by touching the ground and touch the bananas, you operate a piano. We use this in our 6th grade science course to teach kids about conductivity. And we connect everything up, and then we have the kids test different things that are conductive. So besides bananas, what else could you stick this end to still complete the circuit? And they explore tinfoil and pennies, and eventually someone actually gets a cup of water and they experiment with water and see how that works. And then they hold hands and realize that they're conductive. And it's this really great way for them to explore conductivity in a really simple setting. So our Makey Makers are constantly busy in our class. In the 6th grade math class, use them to create video game controllers for their math unit, where they build scratch games using the XY coordinates on a plane. It's really kind of interesting to see them engage in the creation of a controller based on a game that they created in Scratch. And here's one of those examples that I built for the kids there. You can sort of see how we used the cardboard, we used brass brads, and then wired up the Makey Makey, and then to the back of the cardboard we wired in, and then I taped everything down just so it didn't wiggle and move around. But the supplies are super cheap: cardboard, brass brads, and then if you have a set of Makey Makeys, very easy to click together and assemble. So definitely worth exploring for your space and just for other classes as well. Raspberry Pi. So I have been a big fan of Raspberry Pi for quite some time. Raspberry Pi, as you can see here, is a computer board. It's actually the size of a credit card, and it costs $35 no matter what version it is. So the newest version, no matter what, will be $35. It has an HDMI port. It has a micro USB for power. It has 4 USB ports as well as a Ethernet. You can connect a camera to it. You can connect it directly to a monitor. Those pins at the top you see are called the GPIO pins. Those are the general purpose input output. What's really exciting about those is that allows you to connect lights, buzzers, sensors. It allows you to create so many different projects. Now, this is definitely a more advanced tool that you like to see in middle school or high school to be used. and you can create some amazing projects. I created a very, very rudimentary photo booth. By clicking the button, there's a little hole there at the top. You can see the camera and then the screen, and it'll take a picture. And it'll keep that picture, or it'll send that picture somewhere, depending on what I code it to do. But it's a really fun project for kids to see a photo booth and to see how it works, and to be able to look into the lid and see that it's essentially a tiny little computer, a little monitor, and a camera, all put together for under $100, and you have yourself a photo booth. This is a way better use of money than thousands of dollars on a photo booth to rent for a dance or something like that. So this is a really fun project that I enjoyed sort of exploring. Also, the Raspberry Pi can be used for retro gaming. And one of my big, huge projects that I undertook was converting this pub table that I found into a retro gaming console. So I did tons of research and figured things out and found a flat screen monitor from a thrift store and converted it to HDMI and added buttons and joysticks and put in all my old retro games, and there I have this full pub table that I can sit at with friends and family and play old school games and just sort of have a fun sort of silly time. The whole thing runs off of a $35 computer. So when I show this to kids as an example of what you can do, it gets them really excited, because the idea that you have to learn how to code each individual button and then the joystick and then how you get all those games onto there, it really allows them to dive deep into computer science in a way that's really engaging to them. And sometimes building something like a little mini arcade cabinet like this seems like a crazy, huge, expensive undertaking, but really, you can buy the button sets online from Amazon for $20, and then to buy a Raspberry Pi and all the other pieces that sort of go along to it, you can really do this for under $100. And when I talk to students and I talk to teachers, it's about understanding that we want to give our kids opportunities to create projects that they're excited about, that's meaningful to them. Just handing a kid a bunch of buttons and a Raspberry Pi and say, build something, will really turn them off to the idea of making or computer science. So it's really important that we provide examples as educators on what you can or can't build. Going back a little bit old school, we have yarn. My kids still can't get enough of using yarn. Yarn all over the place, yarn to make bracelets, yarn to make other fun sort of projects like a fall tree on a river bend for a project. And he brought in his own model wire and he bent it in half and he attached all of this yarn and clipped all of the edges. And he goes, look, a fall tree. And it was amazing. I have so much yarn that I have to keep track of because kids love just to come in and just cut yarn, braid yarn, do fun things with yarn. This is more yarn in my life than I ever thought I would experience. And the kids love it. So I never would have gone in expecting to have a part of my budget designated for yarn, but I do. And that's sort of the beauty of an individualized makerspace, is that every makerspace needs to be tailored to the needs of the students. And in a couple of years, kids might not be into or excited about using yarn, and the yarn budget will drift away and that money will be shifted to whatever it is students are really excited about now. So when you look at designing your space, it needs to be a fluid space and it needs to be an organic space, so that when things shift and move and evolve, you are preparing your students for that. Sewing machines are another one. In a world where home ec classes, sewing classes, and things like that have gone by the wayside, sewing machines are really foreign objects to students, and they don't know how to use them. They don't understand conceptually how they work. But I found that once kids have certain types of projects, they're absolutely willing to learn to use a sewing machine. And then they're like, this is pretty cool. I can use a sewing machine. It's amazing that some of the skills that we take for granted as adults, because we had them in school and we were taught how to use a sewing machine, or other tools that have been removed from the classrooms as we as a country invested more in testing and not sewing or wood shop and things like that. Sort of the other end of that would be these high-tech CNC machines. These are desktop CNC machines. They are called Carveys. They are from Inventables. And if you really have kids that are into wood carving and designing and cutting things out, like a Carvey is a solid investment. They are pricey at $2,500 each, but they are fully enclosed. You don't have to stress about setting them up and aligning them. The bigger, larger, sort of older models that can be used really require a lot of user knowledge and experience to set up correctly. These Carveys are really designed for schools, for smaller projects that really take a lot of the guesswork out of setting them up. My students have absolutely loved to use them, mostly using for signs, but we've also used them to make stamps and other things. I think I have stamps later on in the slideshow I could show you, but just an example, here's a sign for our Makerspace, the Knight's Forge, that we're able to design, plot out, and then have it carved to a pretty nice little site there. So it worked out pretty well, and the kids really engage in it, but our high school students really like it, especially in the upper school engineering class and a robotics team in particular. Being able to carve things out with a CNC machine is really, really helpful. Arts and scraps. Can't go wrong, arts and scraps. I have found that parents have lots of arts and scraps at home, and to open up your doors to donations is a wonderful thing. You can never have too much, and that's my space. You might have a space that kids are totally not on board with any arts and scraps type of thing. Again, I found that my space is really leaning more towards into these crafting tools than anything else. And that's really exciting because I love to see kids use what might be called analog tools to create and to make, and then transfer those skills into designing with 3D printers, laser cutters, and things like that in mind. Arduinos are little boards. They look like a Raspberry Pi, but they're not a full computer. They are just a microcontroller, which is essentially a little computer that does one thing really, really well. You program it to do. So I 3D printed a T-Rex head using clear filament, and I organized all of the wires to build a on-off light switch for my son. And you can see the little picture there, bright, super bright, and you can click the little button and it turns on, and then the power source is right there. I was super proud of this build. I was all sort of like from theory that this would work if I wire things up and solder everything together. My son was super excited about it until nighttime, where it totally just scared the living daylights out of him, where he's like, "Dad, it is so scary. There's a glowing T-Rex head in my room." So it stays down in the basement. It's like an example of something that you can sort of build and design. But conceptually, it's one of the things that you can do with a Arduino Uno or Leonardo, and they have a lot of different versions of them. But they're great for small little projects to start to get yourself situated with soldering and LEDs and things like that. So if students are starting to express interest in electronics, Arduino is actually a good place to start, having them look at lights, motors, and things of that nature. That seems crazy, but you can't have enough dry erase supplies. And the reason for that, in my space in particular, is that we set up dry erase tables and boards in our design space because we want kids to freely design. And the more space they have to just take out a marker, get ideas out, draw some things out, the more likely they are to take time for that important part of the process, which is, of course, designing. And without the design, we have terrible prototypes, and then terrible prototypes lead to terrible finished projects. So we really want to support kids in design, and to do that, we really spent the time making sure we had the right dry erase desks and the dry erase boards for kids to work on. 3D printers. There are a lot of different 3D printer types out there for sure. The one that I like most and have in my space are the Dremel ones. And the reason I like them is that they are very durable. They are easy to work with and load filament into. And I've had 3 different versions of the Dremel over the past 4 years or so, and I've yet to have a single non-user related problem. I had one problem, it was totally my fault, called their help desk and they fixed it instantaneously. Other than that, not a single problem. And so, Dremel makes power tools, another wonderful, great maker tools. So they have sort of that clout to build a very durable, fully enclosed 3D printer. And the software is great so that when you plug in your design and it prints, you actually get an email that gives you a time-lapse video of your print being built. I totally love it. So it's definitely something that if you're looking at, if you're exploring 3D printing, which has almost become sort of a mainstay in makerspaces, you definitely want to check out the 3D45 for a lot of the different amenities that it brings to the table. But that's the one that I recommend at the right price point as well. Here is a safety glasses holder. We got some safety glasses for the Makerspace, and they were all just sort of laying out all over the place. So I designed a little holder for them and was able to throw them into the printer and print them out. And now my safety glasses are all nice and mounted onto a table so that students can grab them as needed. You want to stock up on LEDs, copper tape, batteries. Oh, so many batteries. These are all fairly standard tools for a makerspace if you have students that are going to be exploring electronics. Making a light go off and making paper circuits, copper tape is wonderful for that. These are just basic tools for beginning explorations into electronics. So I definitely want to recommend getting those out there and buying batteries, LEDs, copper tape in bulk, because once students start exploring those, you'll find that they disappear, get burnt out way more quickly than you might realize. It sounds crazy, but food belongs in a makerspace too. Having students design with food is something that happens, and you have kids that just love to bake and create. And here's Mark in his beautiful Acropolis that he built for his project on the Greek history unit they were doing in class. And he was so excited, and he put all of this together and he showcased it off, and we looked at it in the makerspace, and it just was amazing. And I think sometimes we again look at something like baking or cooking as not a form of making, but really for those of us that have had like those grandparents make those most amazing desserts, a lot of making and craft goes into baking and cooking that we can't forget, and that sometimes our kids really are excited for making with food. Kano is a computer that's built with a Raspberry Pi and has a built-in operating system that has Scratch and other coding games as well. For those of you that are looking for a complete sort of all-inclusive system for younger grades, we're looking at grades 1 through 5, 6 maybe. Kano's a great tool for that because it's all built in, you get your keyboard, everything's wired together, and the programming is designed to support kids that are learning about computer science and block-based coding and text-based coding. So if you're looking to create a little station for students to make digitally for younger students, the Kano is a perfect option for you. And then the other end of that spectrum is full spectrum Muse, laser cutter. This is the one that we use in my school, and I am a super big fan of. And as we speak, I have something cutting on a laser cutter right now. And this is if you have a school that is really going to invest in making as a part of their overall curriculum. This is a space, tool in our space that is used just about daily with different projects from different grades across the entire curriculum. So math teachers, English teachers, social studies teachers, science teachers have all been using the laser cutter for really many different reasons. And you can sort of see it in action there, all sort of open and ready to be used. And you have students that are creating awesome things and drawing them out and then having them carved, burned into the laser cutter. And so this is one object that a student made for her friend for their birthday, and they drew it out, and then we were able to burn it into wood. You can sand it down and stain it a little bit. So watching kids sort of utilize these tools and create these awesome things that are not just for class, but just for friends is a really awesome thing to see. As a place to think about coding and creating code and having your own code, GitHub is a repository for all things code. Sometimes kids think they need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to coding, and it's just not true. GitHub social coding is amazing. They are wonderfully helpful people on there. You can create an account, kids can store their code, they can access it later, they can share with other people. When I first got involved with learning to code, GitHub was a place that I spent some time finding examples of the things that I wanted to do, and then messaging the creators to ask them how they did that. And people were really responsive and very helpful. The coding community is actually very nice in my experience. And it's definitely worth exploring if you're looking at students that are investigating code and computer science. So those are all those examples. Oof, it's exhausting. I'll give you a second to sort of take all of that in. Items are nice, but you obviously need a space. And choosing a space can be difficult. Sometimes your hands are tied in regards to a space. I have a very specific opinion on it. I'm not a fan of sticking a makerspace in a locked room that is only accessible with a teacher taking their class into it. Because what tends to happen is that a space ends up locked up and hardly ever used. Because teachers aren't necessarily set up to take a class down to a space to do the things they need to do. For me, I've always advocated for creating either a space in the library or a space that is open for students to come and go freely. And there's a lot of trust that goes to that. But in my current job, I really advocated for creating what eventually became the Next Words Innovation Lab, which is 3 distinct rooms, which I'll show you shortly, that are free for students to come and go from grades 6 through 12 as needed. And teachers bring their classes down. I meet with classes down in there to support them with what they're doing. And finding that space is key. And one of the ways for me to make that possible is that I worked with the Demco team to help design what our space would be. And it was an amazing process. So being able to help them find the right tables and storage issues for me was, I mean, I can't think of enough to be true, because I had ideas, but they had the actual right things for the space and what I was looking for. And also for me, it was a big shout out to Bradford Juice Mobile. One of the things that we had with our space was that we hardly had any outlets, which really made it difficult for our makerspace to sort of function because kids needed to plug in devices. This is really cool because it all works on like magnetic strips that are flat on the ground, so kids can trip over them, but not actually trip because it just detaches magnetically and you can just drop it back on. Super big fan. You definitely want to check those out. This is what my view was in August of this year. We had ordered all of the pieces and I came back in August and everything had been just laid out for me in our commons area. So I was a little terrified, to say the least, but knew that I had all the right pieces and I just needed to sort of assemble this puzzle. There you go. So here's a shot of our design room. So for the design room, one of the things I really focused on was I had chairs, but I really wanted dry erase tables. This is where I want my kids to design and to build and to create visually with dry erase markers. They can use pencil and paper in their own notebooks too, and some students do that. They bring their devices in here and use that for charging and sometimes doing 3D design on there. But what I really like about this is that everything is mobile and we want to move things around, and kids can do that because they can sort of move the chairs around, move the tables around, and they can take their markers and they just sort of jot ideas out. And here's an example of one of our linguistics classes. These are 8th graders, and they're designing things, symbols, to represent a holiday they were exploring as part of their description unit and their research unit. So they research, and a student here is researching Chinese New Year and sort of design a rough thing of what they wanted to create. And they spent a couple of days in the space. And for some of them, it was this great opportunity to just sort of draw and design and create. And to have the open desk in front of them to do that was really powerful for them. Our design room also has some VR headsets, the Oculus Go's. Here is another linguistics class. This is the 7th grade class. And right now they are taking individual tours of exotic lands for a description piece they're going to have to write. And I remember back in the day, my description piece was look around the room, describe something, hand it to another student, see if they can guess what it is. This one, you have students navigating the Amazon and exploring the glaciers of Iceland and be able to see that in 360 and hear it and move around and to write about that really impacts some of those students, and it definitely engaging those students in particular that really don't respond to sort of looking at just the picture and being asked to write about it. The next room was the prototyping room, and the prototyping room is where we have kids take those designs and make them come to life, and that can be done through more coding, that can be designed through 3D printers, and some of the pictures here we see kids fine-tuning their 3D designs for the printers that are sort of behind them on the wall you can't see right now. I also have Play-Doh you see some of the kids out there and doing, and a girl in the back is using VR Minecraft is what she's using back there. And there are tools and robots and everything all over the place, and it's an awesome place because it's keeping kids super busy. And again, sometimes they're just crafting, sometimes they're taking paper plates and cutting out hearts, sometimes they're using Play-Doh. Sometimes they're just working on finishing up their video projects there. But it's an awesome space because kids really come together and they can sort of talk, hang out, design, create, and have a good time of the day, and they feel comfortable being there, which is, for me, really important. I really like showing this because it blew my mind. Students showed me that they could make these hot glue hearts. And they go, you just do this, and then you put in the hot glue, and then you take it out. And what they hadn't quite realized is that they essentially just created a mold system for this hot glue. And I said, you've realized if you made different things out of Play-Doh, other shapes or designs, and filled it with hot glue, the same thing would happen. And they're like, whoa, like we could make like figurines, and we could like add color, and it would change color, and we could like food coloring. And all of a sudden, these kids got all of these crazy ideas, but I had never seen anyone do this before. And I said, where did you learn to do that? And they said, oh, YouTube. So sort of keep that in mind, is that there are a lot of great YouTube makers out there doing fun craft things. The last room is the fabrication room. And the fabrication room is sort of the heavy machinery room. This is just one angle of it. You can see a large CNC machine there. I also have miter saws, table saws. The laser cutter lives in here as well. This is the space that students learn that they can't be in on their own. They don't have access to the tools without adult supervision. And the simple reason is that safety. I want kids not to be hurt, but I also want them to be able to use these tools. And to do that, it's about giving them time in the space. And so here's a student doing some measuring and getting ready to cut, and have her use the saws there to actually cut for the first time. It was a really exciting moment for her. And the question I get more than anything else is having these spaces, having these tools is, well, where does this fit in the curriculum? My administrator wants to know, if we're going to spend thousands of dollars, how does this fit into our very specific curriculum that we've spent years building? And those are really great questions, and I totally get that. And as part of that, I always say it's not like they live in the curriculum in the sense that you are specifically writing lessons that incorporate the Makerspace directly. You can do that, but it's not necessary. For me, the big use of Makerspaces come from a project-based learning approach. And here are a couple of examples of those students that did their drawings for their holidays. And there's the Chinese New Year, and there is the sugar skull for Cinco de Mayo. Day of the Dead, not Cinco de Mayo, Day of the Dead. And we want kids to create based on real projects in their classes, have that opportunity to do so. We use the CNC machines for students to carve out their names in Chinese to make stamps, so that they can actually stamp their names onto their assignments in a sort of traditional Chinese way. And the Chinese teacher was really excited, and this is going to be like a standard intro to Chinese assignment that kids are going to do every single year, is that they're going to figure out their name in Chinese, and they're going to design them, and we're going to cut them out on the CNC machine. So we have foreign language utilizing the Makerspace really effectively. And it's about coming up with those projects that has the support for kids to make something, to create something. And for me, it's about having kids demonstrate understanding through the creation of something. And so she cut this out from the laser cutter, designed it, and then took colored pencil and filled it in to make it something stand out a little bit more. And then she can have this artifact, and then she can share it with students, she can share it with class, and explain what this means, why this is important. And so as she creates, she needs to understand more thoroughly what's going on. And to be able to demonstrate that understanding, she creates this artifact. And we want to create a culture of makers and not just consumers, because that's where we're heading. And sometimes those physical objects are photos. And here's probably one of my all-time favorite student projects is by a student named Nicole. And she got her sister to be all painted up for her and take some photos after a Gothic element unit. In sophomore English, we spent time discussing Gothic literature and the different parts of it that make it all up. And my assignment was demonstrate understanding of the elements of Gothic literature through any means that you want. It's a very open project. And a lot of kids chose a lot of different things, and Nicole chose photography. And some of the work that she was able to create is really breathtaking to me. And by breathtaking, I mean absolutely terrifying. That is not a Photoshop picture you're looking at. She waited for the light to be just right to get the shadows on the branches, and she told me it took hours, and it was amazing. And she was diving into the stories that we read to make sure the examples were matching with what she had visioned what was going to be. And for me, that's such a huge success for this student to dive back into literature to make sure that her vision of what she wanted to create was accurate, is a high level of engagement. And for me as a teacher, and this is 3 years ago that this was taken, I still look at these photos and I know exactly which element that she was talking about. And that's really powerful to me, because that means she was able to create something that truly demonstrated her understanding of those Gothic elements. And that's what you're really hoping for as a teacher. This was a student this year right now. He is a senior, and he is doing an art project where they had to do a self-portrait. And he did this line tracing paper. And he's like, hey, I heard that we can use a laser cutter. I was thinking I could laser this onto wood. And I was like, yes. And there's this amazing laser etched onto wood, his likeness. And then he would go on to actually use different stains to bring out the features even more so. So here's an art student just exploring the makerspace and utilizing the tools in a different way. And again, some kids just love using Lego and creating dioramas out of boxes, and there's nothing wrong with that. As they were exploring their different holidays, this is what they chose to use. Sometimes creating a podcasting little hub studio for kids to come and record audio and to do book talks and to make something amazing through audio is still something that you can do. Students were utilizing the Makerspace to build a cart for the robotics team. And they came and had never used any tools before, bought all of the wood, took all of the measurements, used the laser cutter to burn the top onto the cart, and added the wheels and learned to use saws and drills and nail guns all for the first time. And this group of 1 girl and 3 boys had never used any tools before. And they came up with this really nice battery cart. So those are going to hold all the major batteries for the robotics team. And they did this from scratch. And I think that's such an amazing thing and a testament to students, is that they're able to create something so amazing by just having access to those tools. 6th graders were carving early morning for their social studies project using hieroglyphics. And it was a fun little project they put together as a demonstration, and we carved that out for them, and they were really excited about it. But it was just a very simple project for them to carve, because they really wanted to look like sort of like those reliefs that you would see in ancient Egypt. And there's pictures of students utilizing tools for the museum, using drills, working together as teams, hammering things together, designing, measuring, cutting things out. It's such an important part of that process. We want kids to explore and design and create. And so we have to give them opportunities to do it. We also have to give them access to tools to do that. And for me, it's all part of that larger maker mentality. And for me, I view that as being an artist, a hacker, a storyteller. being passionate, being a dreamer, being true to yourself, being fearless, and for us as teachers, most importantly, to be inclusive. We want and need to create an environment that is welcoming to every type of maker out there. Aya Bader, she's the founder and CEO of Little Bits. She was really nice to be able to read my book and provide this quote for it that I think is just so spot on. The single most important aspect of the maker mentality for me is learning fearlessness, not irresponsible fearlessness, but fearlessness with humility. And I think sometimes we tell teachers, we tell students that, oh, no fear, like go big, go home, and don't be afraid of those things. It's okay to be a little bit afraid, but it's not about being irresponsible. Just recklessly go and build things. Like, don't worry about it. There's a fear that is good and it drives you to be careful and to take a look at your surroundings and make good choices. But we want our students to understand that fear of failure is okay to overcome. But that fearlessness with humility is such an amazing view of it, that we're going to try to overcome all of these aspects. And we want our students to be able to do that. And it's about creating that environment to accomplish that. And my last thing that I'll say before we pass it back off is that as teachers, as educators, you have to be makers yourselves. There's something really important when students see teachers making. And that making, again, can be whatever it is that works for you. It could be knitting and sewing or coding. It could be arts and crafts or scrapbooking or really making music and taking photos. Showcase those things to students. Show them that as adults, we are lifelong learners and lifelong makers, because sometimes there's this idea that, well, I'm too old to make, or it's, that's not for me, or little kids do it. You need to demonstrate this. You need to model it. And to do that, you really need to make. You need to create for them. And so I highly encourage you to take projects to class or hang up work that you've done to showcase to students, because, it's okay to brag a little bit about the things that you make. I bring all of my projects in that I'm working on. Sometimes I let students help me work on them if I'm having trouble with the code or the electronics, and they get really excited and we can do it together as a team. It can be really powerful. So I encourage all of you to definitely take that time to make and create. This is just a short bit of what the starter guide to Makerspace sort of looks like. My book on the left there is filled with more tips and tricks, and to talk about funding and talking about getting parents and administrators on board. There's definitely lots of there. And then the maker mentality is all about sort of the culture of making and how important it is to establish that in your school so that your makerspace can thrive. And that's the toughest thing, and the big thing that administrators definitely want to address is, if we're going to invest in a space, how do we address filling that space with people and teachers? And a part of that is the environment that you create. And so the maker mentality is all about designing opportunities for students, teachers, and administrators to help build that culture and connect everything together. I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to come to this webinar and listen to it online, or to listen to it later on through a recording. So for you guys, as I said, this is sort of ready, set, make. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me through Twitter or Instagram. I'd love to hear how I can help you guys build the space that's perfect for your school. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. And thanks especially for the reminder that every makerspace can be tailored to the needs of the students who are using it. It looks like we have time for a couple of questions from our listeners. And also just a reminder that the full Q&A will be emailed to you next week if we don't get to your question today. So the first question is about space. My physical space is limited. Do you have any suggestions for making within smaller spaces?
Yeah, so I've seen maker spaces on carts have been an effective way to move things around. I've seen 3D printers and even laser cutters, to be honest, on carts that shuffle from room to room to room. You can actually get some really nice carts to fill with different supplies that can be wheeled from room to room. A library is a nice central location to host all of that. So as a teacher, if you're looking to maximize your space, sometimes a cart that rotates from space to space as a nice flexible option to limited locations in a school.
Great, thank you. The second question also is about the physical space. Do you have any suggestions for creating a makerspace within a new school building? What considerations would you have?
Oh, that's such a dream to have a brand new building that you're putting together and to build from the ground up. The best advice I have is to put it in a central location that is easily accessible, because you want to remove as many barriers as possible for student and teacher access. So if you put it somewhere in a learning lab, a library, a media center, I think that's such a great place because students are there, teachers are there, they're interacting with the space. And if some of these tools just sort of out and operating for kids to sort of walk by and casually interact with, I think is also really, really great. So, man, to have a brand new school, I would say the other thing is if you think you have enough storage, add some more. You never have enough storage in a makerspace. I went from 1 room to 3 rooms, and I thought, oh, this is great, I'll have all this room. And then I find myself going, I could probably use another room for storage. So the more storage you can have, the better, especially for a brand new space. So look at cabinets, look at tables that have storage underneath them that are built in, put things on wheels so things can move around very easily, and lots of outlets. You want to plug a lot of things in. So I would definitely keep that in mind as well.
Great, thanks for those suggestions. And one last question before we wrap it up. What suggestions do you have for motivating students to use the makerspace and then encouraging that ongoing engagement?
Yeah, so part of that is working with teachers to create, again, more project-based learning happening in those classrooms. You will always have the self-motivated students down in the makerspace if they know about it. And sometimes that's, if you're a librarian, identifying those students that come to your library and are checking out books or looking up things on creating or building, talking to other teachers and saying, hey, do you have anyone that seems to really engage in projects and make and design, and talk to the art teachers to see which students might really engage that, and reach out to them, say, hey, we have these things, I thought you might like to check them out or design or do this. But really, I found that the best long-term engagement is when teachers are working through project-based learning and kids utilize the space, and then they realize, oh, I can do this for fun for me, like not just school projects. So depending on how your school's set up and how you connect with students, I found the most successful long-term engagement is once teachers start engaging in project-based learning, that students really engage in the space because they're more familiar with it and start to see it from more than just a place to do homework assignments.
Great, thanks for that. It looks like we're out of time for today. We want to thank our presenter, Nicholas, for sharing his insights with us all. And we hope that everyone was able to take away some ideas that they can implement in their own makerspaces. And a reminder that a recording of this webcast will be available on the Demco Ideas and Inspiration website by next week. That's at ideas.demco.com. So you can review the presentation and share with your colleagues. And next week, you'll also be receiving an email that will include the slides, a resource list, and the Q&A. And you will receive a survey at the end of this webinar so that you can let us know how we did. Please take a few moments to give us your feedback and thoughts on future webinar topics as well. Again, thank you for joining us today and have a wonderful afternoon.